out of exasperation, I said, "All right, you win, I die."
Inquisitive friends are asking me what's come over me. A change, there's been a change, and it's oh so plain to see.
Hello, I'm Ruth Ann Leelisher. Many years ago, being on the road to Damascus meant a radical change for a guy named Saul. We know him as the Apostle Paul. Sometimes change comes looking for us. Sometimes we're just desperately looking for something. This time, our road starts at the beach and leads us around the world. Our story is about a gifted artist who searched for the meaning of life from the inside out. Meet Hyatt Moore.
But I remember when I was 8 years old thinking I never want to be another age. In fact, 8 is still my favorite number. And I was the oldest of 5 children. My parents loved God, and they raised me to be such. It was in my teenage years that I began to wander from that. I think it was because my mother was quite strict, and she kind of kept the boundaries quite tight, and I was very curious about what was on the other side, and so I began to break from that. And I walked away real far and never thought about God anymore. Yeah, so then I became kind of a rebel. Just very far from God and doing all the things that were on the no-no list, just getting away with things. And when you find out that you can get away with them, you know, the heaven doesn't fall in on you just because you've sinned. You just go farther. Now later it does, but at first you think, well, what was the big deal about the taboo list? This is fun life. Yeah, and then marijuana started coming in. I was very intrigued with that, and the other heavier psychedelic drugs. They were all on that list, and I thought, well, I want to try that. And it was during that time that I formulated my goals. I thought, I would like to be a graphic designer. In fact, I would like to be an art director, which is sort of a graphic designer with a lot of responsibilities and maybe a staff and dealing with other creative people. But I thought that was a distant goal, like 50 years, in my 50s I might reach that. And then I bought a little Porsche, and I thought, I love this. I'd like to get a newer one someday, so that became a goal. And then I discovered sailing, and I thought if I could have a sailboat, that would fulfill me. I'd love that. And then later I thought, well, we should buy a house, and maybe a Mexican-style house that we can really make into kind of an artful place would be nice. And then not too much later, I was offered this job at Surfer Magazine, and they paid me pretty well. And pretty soon I realized, I've reached my goals. I've got my job as an art director. I bought a new Porsche, and I had a nice little sailboat, and we bought a house, and I had this beautiful wife. That's pretty much all the things I could think of that I could ever want. And that's when I began to realize that I'm not happy. I'm not fulfilled. And these things aren't doing it, and they never will. I realize that. I realize that normally at a time like that, you quickly, even maybe before you reach your goal, set new ones that are farther out yet, and you just keep racing. But the fact is, what's it about? If you finally reach your goals, and all you have is an emptiness. And so I thought, I suppose I could work to get a newer car, although I like that model. I didn't like the new model. And I like that boat. That house was fine. Why get bigger things? And if I did, where would I be but where I am right now anyway? Wondering what it's all about. Unfulfilled. And that was kind of a crisis. I thought, if this is all life offers, then what is it? I'm disappointed. Well, I started smoking a lot of marijuana. Smoking it not only every evening, but every day. And all my friends did. I didn't know anybody that didn't. I was sort of on an exploration. If the happiness of life isn't external, it must be internal. And this sort of marijuana was helping me, in a sense, take the time to explore these other things. It wasn't just that, but that was a common theme. But the trouble is, during that time, I was also losing my health. And it seemed as though every time I got into a social context, I'd have my stomach would just go wild, and I'd have to excuse myself to the bathroom and have a hard time coming back to the social setting. And that became so awkward and embarrassing that it had the effect of having me avoid those social settings. So I became more and more reclusive. That's what started really getting my attention. When I began to realize, look, I'm just 26, and I feel like I've got the body of an old man and a dying old man. Now life is really disappointing me. And then one evening, I was smoking hash, and I, for whatever reason, went over to the local library. I found myself in the self-help section, and I was looking at titles. And I pulled one off the shelf, and I looked at the table of contents. Now remember, I'm sort of high, and I'm kind of looking real slow at these things. But I start seeing these chapter heads that seem to talk to my situation. And so I checked the book out. One of the things it says, you've got to change your mind. You can't be negative as a person, you have to be positive. I thought, how can I be positive? I look at the world. It's disappointed me. Look at the newspaper. It's falling down around us. But the book was saying, you have to be positive or you won't last. You know, I thought, well, there's a pragmatism here. I have to be positive just to survive. I determined to become a positive person. I didn't know I'd become a negative person. I didn't want to be a negative person. I wanted to be an honest person. But when I was honest and looked around, all I could be was negative. They said, you can't be cynical. I thought, I can't give up cynicism. That's my gift. But no longer cynical. Always looking at the bright side. The glass is half full, not half empty. All those things. And then after that book, I read another one on self-hypnosis. From there went on, it was natural to move into things like yoga. And I thought, well, that opened up a whole other world, you know, heading east on your mind trips. And I read a book on reincarnation. I was trying these different things. You know, I'd kind of put them on and wear them for a while, talk about them, and then I'd move on to the next thing. So I was doing that, and every now and then I'd have to nudge my wife and say, we're doing this now. He'd say, oh, okay, kind of move along to the next fad that I was discovering. A friend of mine that I ran into, he was, I very much respected him. He was a nuclear physicist, and he was an ecologist, and I thought, well, I'll move into that direction. Now, the problem with that field is it's so controversial, because we are really polluters by nature, and our whole economy is sort of based on doing that. So even if we do clean up our act, and I think we should and do somewhat, we're never going to clean it up enough. You can't solve it. And if you project it far enough, you realize this could be our demise as a race. Well, that was a negative thought. I'm not supposed to have negative thoughts. You know, I've told myself, be a positive person. But how do you be a positive person and be honest? Now I'm stuck again. Here I finally came out of my internal malaise, and I was becoming a pretty healthy person, and I was excited about life again, and I became a responsible citizen with a cause, and what am I doing? I'm getting depressed again. In the meantime, my dad lent me a book, or gave me a book. Well, the book was The Late Great Planet Earth. I looked at that book and I thought, well, that's Christian. That's one book I won't read. On all of my quests of trying different things, I even said this to my wife at one time, Christianity is one place I'm not going, because I've been there and I know what it is. So I looked at this book and thought, okay, right, I'm going to read that, sure, and I put it aside. A month later, my dad, I saw him again, he says, did you read that book? I said, I lost it. He said, well, here, have another one. I said, you got another one? He said, I got a case of them. I thought, I'm not going to get out of this. A month later, my wife and I went to Mexico again. We would go from time to time. But in this case, I went away to read because I was serious about my future. So I got any books from anybody that seemed to say anything about the future. Well, I read this book too. In fact, I read it first. I read it first to get it out of the way. I had to kind of appease my conscience and tell my dad next time I saw him, yeah, I read that book, so that then I'd read my other ones. This book talks about Jesus, really. It talks about these prophecies that had predicted Jesus coming, and there were so many, and they aligned so well that it couldn't have been anybody else but the actual historical Jesus of the Bible. And then it goes on to say there's twice as many prophecies about his second coming. And when that happens, the world will look about like it's beginning to look now. And I thought, well, this makes sense. And every now and then he'd give an invitation to believe. I couldn't quite understand what that had to do with all of this. You know, I'd practiced my speed reading during that time. I just kind of go beyond, yeah. But on the last page, he had one more invitation to believe, and I thought, well, you know, I've been reading a lot of books, and I've been taking every one of them seriously. I've been putting every one on like a garment and trying them. I thought, I ought to try that with this. But I also knew I couldn't just try it. I had to do it. I had to actually believe it. How do you pretend like you believe? You have to decide to believe. That was a hard one. But I thought, well, I better do it. So on the last page there, by myself, I don't know where Ann was, just laying on a bed, I turned my face to the wall, and I started praying. God, if you're there, come into me. Forgive me my sins. And I caught myself in the middle. I thought, this is crazy. This is the wall. What am I doing talking to the wall? And I thought, no, you know, if God is everywhere, then he's here in the wall too. And I got to just do this. Well, nothing happened right then, you know, but it was still kind of a big thing. I had to be an honest person. I had to mean what I was saying as much as I could. The next day, we got in the car and drove off to Mazatlan and checked into a motel and took a nap. I went out to the beach and just took a walk. It was on that walk on the beach that it came over me. All of a sudden, I just realized what I'd done. I thought, this is the first right thing I've done in 10 years. The very thing I've been running away from is I just bumped into. God just sort of said, stop here. This is what you're looking for. If you're looking for meaning in life. And it just came over me. I don't know if the Spirit or what, but I was smiling by myself so broadly it hurt. And yet I was just crying, you know, just tears. I thought, this is wonderful. God has come into me. And besides that, he's opened my eyes. I'd been afraid that the world was falling apart. Now I knew it was falling apart. I should be more negative. I was more positive. Not that I was happy about that, but I could see there was a plan to it. And it was honest. And God was going somewhere. But it's reality, and you can't get out of reality. You have to face it like it is. And I could face it with strength and hope. Now I could be honest and positive. Because in spite of everything falling apart, and you can see it in prophecy, you can see it in the newspaper, you have a hope that goes way beyond that, and know that God is in control. That changed my life. I'm going to look back to that and I say, that is the center moment of my life. And I started talking to Ann about it. She thought, well, here we go again. You know, he's read another book. We're going to try something else for a while. You know, why wouldn't she think that? But I started talking and said, no, this is different. This will never change. This is deep. I will never, and I know you'll just find out. I didn't want to push it too much because I know that new Christians can become so overzealous, they're tiresome. And here we are driving around Mexico in a little Porsche, you know. So I didn't want to be too heavy on it. But in fact, everything was different, and I couldn't not talk about it. We lost our camera, but stolen out of our car, and I thought, well, I guess somebody else can use it now. I had my turn. Ann says, who's this guy? This is not the guy I came across the border with. There's something that happened to this guy. And that's what really began to get her attention. I kept praying for her salvation. Later, she told me that she actually accepted the Lord there in Mexico, but she didn't want to do it just because I said so, so she didn't admit it. But that was my transition moment. Came back from Mexico 3 weeks later. People said, hey, Hyatt, what happened to you? I said, what? He said, well, you look different. I thought, that's far out. It was an internal change, but it's showing on the outside. And then I'd tell them. They say, you? Because they knew that I was, you know, not going that way at all. So you are a Christian? And it got some people's attention in a positive way, others in a negative way. I decided I would go to church. I hadn't been to church in many years, except for the one Thursday evening they got me into one to get married. So when I showed up at church on a Sunday morning, and my mother was just shocked, you know. And then we went up to dinner, and during a quiet moment of the meal, I said, well, I just want to tell you that I'm home. To me, that meant everything. But that's all I said. And they didn't know what I meant by that. They kind of thought, well, he's been in Mexico for a month and he's home. So then I left for the day, not knowing that I hadn't really communicated, but they all wondered, they thought, did he mean something else? And then my younger sister told them what I told her. He's home. He's accepted Christ. They couldn't believe it. They thought, Hyatt? My brother says, I'd quit praying for him. It was a return of the prodigal son. But I still loved all my friends. All my friends are dope smokers. I'm still smoking dope. Every now and then I'd quit for a day. And I'd say, see, I can handle it. So at one point I finally said, Lord, if you see this as a sin, then take it away from me. That was my prayer. Prayed one time. The next day I had no desire, which was altogether new. Because even the days I didn't have it, I had a desire. I had no desire that day, nor the next day. And so I thought, the Lord answered that prayer. And it was a two-pronged prayer. If you see it as sin, take it away. He took it away. So how does he see it? So then later on when I was tempted again and got in with my friends and they're smoking and passing it around, I thought, no, I can't. I won't. And I never had it again. That was the end of that. So that was, that's just an example of how the habits began to drop off. And that was kind of an obvious one. There's been others. Some take years. But it's a change. It's a change. You want to please God now. You want to do the right thing. Still sin, but you don't like it. About a year and a half into my new Christian life, I had another experience that transformed me. I didn't see it coming. But I was in a church now, reading the scriptures, and I thought, I would like to serve God with my life. So, what do I do? Now, in those days, I had a good habit of after work and before supper, stopping in an empty field and praying. I'd take a long walk, take a half an hour or an hour, just out there, and I could pray out loud, which is a great thing. Kind of keep the subject, without wandering. And I would come up to this subject of, Lord, I would like to serve you with my life, but I don't know what that means. And it seemed like it would mean throwing away my career. I couldn't think of an art director or a graphic designer serving God. Now I know that God gives every gift and he can use every gift. But at that time I thought, well, there's probably no need for this in the kingdom, so I will have to do something else. And I can't think of anything else that's interesting. So that was kind of hard. In fact, that was the bigger one. Even before I got saved, I had articulated in one of our dope smoking evenings, I don't care if I'm ever rich or anything else, but I have to have an interesting life. That was my main focus. It's got to be an interesting life. And if you throw that away and you don't know what you're trading it for, that's hard. That is a death to self experience. And I did this for days. I couldn't get off the subject. Every day I'd be back to this prayer, and I couldn't say yes because it was too big a deal. It was everything. I thought, why did I think of this? But now I can't undo it. I'm there. I'm stuck. And so finally, out of exasperation, I said, all right, you win, I die. I will serve you with my life, even if it's a boring life. Look at the biggest picture. It's not a bad trade. I'm going to live another 60 years or whatever. And I'm trading that boring for a life that's eternally more rewarded. Well, it was about that time, about a month later, a young woman came to our church who was a missionary with Wycliffe Bible translators. She had been on the mission field just a couple of months and was already back because her mother was very sick. And so while she was back, somebody knew her in the church. They had to come down and speak and show slides. And she said, here's the director's office. Here's the hangar. And then she went to the print shop. And then she says, here's the art department. I thought, hey, I know how to do that. I don't remember the rest of the slides. I just remember I was thinking, is this it? So I went home and I talked it over with Ann. I said, maybe this is it. Who knows? How do you find out? I just read somewhere where you can't steer a parked car. You got to be moving. If you're moving, the Lord will just guide you. So I thought, well, what do I do but move? So I wrote a letter. The next day I walked to one of these corner boxes that you pull out the little handle and you drop your letter in. I remember hesitating right then, thinking, do I let it go? Here's my life, Let that thing drop, let the door close, and see what happens. Well, a few days later, they wrote back and sent me an application for a short-term service. That's what I was asking about. But finally, they said, yeah, we have a place for you in Guatemala. Well, so I gave my notice at the magazine. They were amazed at that. They thought, it's one thing to accept the Lord and be kind of different now. But this, that was really extreme. Radical. And I sold my Porsche. Whoa. Didn't know what to do with my boat. I asked the Lord said, give it away. I thought, give it away? Right now when I'm trying to get money? But I felt he said that, and I did. It's a whole story. The years later on, I started seeing boats come to me when I wanted one or needed one. It's just amazing how that happens. Now when we went to Guatemala, I was working in their print shop, and I was doing basic paste up. You know, keep the page straight, cut it up, but real basic. You know, anybody could do it. And I'm doing this for a couple of days. I remember looking out the window one day and thinking, you know, Lord, I told you I would serve you with my life even if it was boring. And sure enough, it's boring. You know, this is about as dull a job as you could get. But then I thought, you know, man, maybe this is a test. So I'll just do it. And if this is a test, I'll just pass it. But I thought, no, I am going to just do this work. I'm not going to complain. Somebody has to do it. I can do it. I will do it. I will not complain. And that's what I did. And another month went by of that. And then the head of the whole shop, he was transferred to Dallas, international headquarters. And he'd been looking all around the organization for a replacement, couldn't find one. Every now and then he'd look at me. I said, don't look at me. I don't know about that kind of work. In the end, he said, well, I have nobody else, so here's the keys. You know, handle it. Well, now I was not just doing my job, but also doing his job and running that place. The whole thing was new. And it was so exhilarating. I mean, I rose to it. I thought it was so much fun trying to do this that life became very interesting, you know. And so, in fact, I was ready to do that the rest of my life. I decided I'm not going to be a short-termer here. I'm going to be a long-termer. This is wonderful. I love it. It's fulfilling. It's stimulating. It's mentally challenging. And it's interesting. And it's important. But after a year of doing it that way, they found out that I could do more sophisticated graphic design, and they were beginning to do their graphic design in-house back at the headquarters in California for the U.S. headquarters, and so I was transferred back as a disappointment to me. I thought, I'll do it because the Lord is leading, but I don't want to, because I want to live an interesting life cross-culturally. But oh well. But it became very interesting there. Well, in time, they transferred me to Papua New Guinea. I thought, well, this is another death to self. It was another death to self. I went up to that mountain again, that hill, and spent a whole day fasting and prayer. I said, Lord, this is not right. And the Lord said, yes, it is. And so I said, okay. Well, that was a great experience, too. Cross-culturally again, working with these wonderful people and this great purpose. But then after 2 years of that, then we were transferred to Dallas at the international headquarters, where I was appointed a vice president for public affairs. Well, that was a pretty high job and a pretty fun job. Very interesting. Involved a lot of travel. And then there was an internal election to elect the new president of Wycliffe USA. So I was elected president of Wycliffe USA. And I was moved. First, that Wycliffe, which is fairly conservative, would elect a guy like me. But also a guy like me who knows he started at the bottom in every way. I wasn't aiming for this. I wouldn't have expected it. But it's God being faithful. He's saying, you don't give up anything, that don't just pile things back on you. I was president of Wycliffe for 5 years. During the fourth, maybe even the third and a half, another change happened that I didn't see coming. One night, coming home, stopping at a light, I looked in, just sort of musing, looked in the gallery window, and I thought, you know, I could do that. I could be a painter if I applied myself. And I started getting exhilarated about this idea. Monday came, and I went back to work, and you know, when you're the president of an organization, everybody wants your time, and you're in meetings all the time. But I thought, when am I going to be an artist? I can't do this. And it's like as fast as that vision came over me, it dissipated again. Some months later, the organizational and the new board that had come on was saying there's a lot of changes going on and some internal stress. Maybe we better have less creativity now and just more organizing and putting in business principles on these innovations. And so that's what they did. And they did it as kindly as possible, but I thought I was out of a job. But I saw it as of God too. And so I accepted it. Well, what do I do now? What I'd like to do is be an artist. And so I thought, am I supposed to do this? And that's when I started wrestling with God. I said, well, I don't have very much talent. And the Lord says, well, I give seeds. That's the deal. I said, well, what about the guy that seems to have been born with more? And he says, what about him? I compare him with him and you with you. I said, well, there's no guarantee that if it would take a lot of time to develop this, and if I did develop it, there's no guarantee that it would be useful to you or to any purpose. And the Lord said, that's right, there are no guarantees. And I realized life is by faith. And I started painting these ethnic people. It was natural to me because we had a slide file full of them, and I've been serving these people for 25 years anyway, or 30 now. And they're beautiful, full of dignity and worth painting. Then we put together a book called In the Image of God, and that became a great kind of publicity piece for Wycliffe Bible translators. And so there was art again, not just mine, but other artists that I brought in together, designed a book, wrote it. Then came up with this piece by the Lord's leading for a missions conference that was the Last Supper, which has got Jesus at the center, and instead of the 12 disciples, 12 different tribesmen that are representing the 6,000 in the world, which is basically really not the last supper, but the next supper, when all people from all tongues and tribes and nations will be with us together at the feast. And that's been a significant painting, and people have seen a message there. I didn't know myself how far that would go, but it continues to go out, and God is using it. And so I see God is using an oil painter, you know, who's got a set of skills that I'm still struggling to develop, and I don't always hit it. And I'm not, you know, I'm still developing as an artist. But I'm an artist that is dedicated to God, and I didn't know what that would mean. And now I see that God is using even oil painting in His service, and I'm having a more interesting life than I've ever had. It just goes on and on and on. You can't know what would have happened if you'd taken another direction. But I can't imagine having stayed at Surfer Magazine and tried to just live a life that's getting more and more income and bigger Porsches and bigger sailboats, that could have competed at all with the life that I'm living now.
Hyatt told us that God gave him the adventure he was looking for. We have a feeling that Hyatt's travels are far from being over. Please write us here at Damascus Roads. Let us know what's on your mind. Or perhaps you have questions about what you saw on the program this evening. Or maybe you have your own Damascus Road experience that you'd like to share with us. We'd love to hear from you. Join us next week on an altogether different road. We look forward to seeing you then. Bye.
Once I was a hollow man in which a lonely heart didn't dwell. Then love came sneaking upon me, bringing life to an empty shell. Now I heard so many times before that no love could be so bad. But I just wanna tell you people, it's the best love I've ever.
Tonight's program has been sponsored by the Trinity Broadcasting Network. And only with your love gift of support can it stay on the air. So please write to TBN, PO Box A, Santa Ana, California, 92711. Or email us at damascusroads@tbn.org.